over those. I also wanted to preview a little bit about next week because we're moving into Unit 2, which is the 16th and 17th centuries, into the Renaissance. So I think it'll be short. I've been around a half an hour, or I think second period was a little less than that for the time frame. So, we don't have to spend the entire time. Besides, I think the other day I took up more than an hour, so it'd be good to balance out. So today is a day to review, ask questions. We're going to go over the study guide. I'll give you an opportunity to ask if there are any items on the study guide that you want me to talk about so that you can get notes. We'll talk about discussion 2, but let me start by talking about next week. So on the calendar, you can see that next week we're moving into the 16th and 17th centuries. Sort of like the late 16th, all of the 16th century and the early 17th century. The Restoration happens after that, and that's in the end of the 17th century. We'll cut off before then for this unit. But Tuesday will be the official start of that new unit. It's already up on Blackboard, so you should already be able to see all the components of the unit. For Tuesday, you need to read the background on the 16th century and take some notes. On Tuesday, I will go over the main points of that reading assignment, entertain any questions that you might have. And also there are 3 poems that you need to read for next Tuesday. And you can find those in the reading list for Unit 2. It's set up exactly the same way. I'll be organizing each unit exactly the same way so that you can always find what it is that you're looking for. But if we go to the readings for Unit 2, so 1 and 2 are the ones for Tuesday, and then 3 and 4 are the ones for Thursday next week. So you'll be reading the background in the 16th century, and then these are the poems that you need to read for Tuesday. I will talk about them, but you should do a solid analysis of them so that you can ask any questions that you have. I feel like sometimes people just show up to watch the Mrs. Ramos Talks About Literature show, and I feel like that's missing a little bit of, filling in wherever you have questions or whatever. I'm just going to usually talk about the basics. So there's 3 poems also for Tuesday. What else was I going to say? There is not, if you look on the calendar, there is not a discussion next week. There are 12 discussions in 15 weeks. So I had to kind of look at the schedule about when to put in the discussions. And the discussions, there's a couple that I wrote because I didn't like the ones that they had, but for the most part, they're the ones that are intrinsic to the course. So like discussion 3 is about Renaissance poetry. Well, I want to make sure that you've had a good opportunity to read and discuss that topic before you do discussion 3. I also thought next week is a long weekend, not this one coming up, but the following one, because we have the weather day the day after the Super Bowl. So I just kind of thought maybe that could be a little bit of a break weekend. Besides, you have to start reading Othello. So is it really a break? I don't know. But yeah, so you'll see that there are spaces where you don't necessarily have a discussion due, but there is one today. So let me go to the discussions. I've been getting almost all of the discussion 1 grades and commentary in, but I'm commenting on each person's responses, not just their post, but also their replies to their classmates. So as I'm getting those done, I think I'll be finished by the end of the day today. So you should be able to, and by that I mean 4 o'clock for me. So you should have commentary and a grade on your first discussion, and then discussion 2 is the one that you should be posting on by the end of the day today, and then your replies are for Monday over the weekend. So I went over these yesterday. Is there any question about the discussion number 2? Okay. Well, if you think of something, you can let me know. I want to spend the rest of the time today on the study guide for the Canterbury Tales. In case there's anything on here, this is kind of like a way for you to check and make sure that your reading was sufficient. If there's anything on here, there's probably some stuff that I didn't necessarily talk about. That's not the goal of the study guide. The study guide is to make sure that you're reading with depth and preparing for the midterm. So is there anything in the general prologue or the Wife of Bath's prologue and tale that you want me to spend a little bit of time talking about? You can unmute and tell me, or you can just put the number in the chat if you like. And I'll just blab about that topic and you can jot down notes.
Could you go over number 7, please?
Sure. Number 7 on the Wife of Bath, explain the irony the wife uses in the tale. How does the irony contribute to her characterization? Yeah, they asked that last period too. So the irony in the tale is about power. And it's about how at the beginning of the tale, the knight uses his power to dominate and assault a maiden. And then he has to suffer a similar domination with less assault at the end. And so the man who thought that he had all the power to go and abuse someone and, rob them of their consent and their dignity ends up, suffering the indignities that he suffers at the end. So there's an irony, there's a situational irony in that. And how does it contribute to her characterization? Well, we saw in her prologue that the Wife of Bath is about, taking control of men. She sees marriage as a control game, and that she speaks about that in her prologue, and her tale kind of backs that up because the knight has to learn a little bit of humility in order to tell the old woman that he accepts her decision, and he has to humble himself in that way. And so there's that domination factor. The wife ends up getting control over the husband at the end. So there's that irony, and it also speaks to who she is as a character, and what her views are of marriage and how marriages work. Yeah, that's a good one. I should say some of these are pretty close to the questions that are on the midterm exam. Like some of the things I know are on the midterm, I pop them on these study guides. So, if you know what you would say about them, that's great. But if you're kind of like, then just put the number in the chat. You don't have to put it to everybody. You can just put it to me if you want to. But I want to make sure everybody has the opportunity to discuss these elements or hear me talk about them. Anything else on Wife of Bath? This part is called wait time. When you're learning to be a teacher, they teach you about wait time, being patient. In case somebody thinks of something or you're reading. All right, well, what about the partner? We talked about that one yesterday, but is there anything listed on the study guide about the partner, his prologue or his tale that you want me to spend a little time discussing?
Could you go over number 8, please?
Of course. Number 8, how is the partner's general prologue portrait reflected in the tale? That's kind of the reason why I did the portrait yesterday. And it wasn't an assignment that you had, but that's why I brought it up in the PowerPoint. So we learn about how he uses manipulation, or how he tricks people into giving him money by making them feel guilty. And if he can make them feel guilty, then they'll contribute, and he can then turn some of that money over to the church like he's supposed to. But if the more he can make, the more he can keep for himself. So we learn in the general prologue that the partner has, certain persuasive techniques. And we find out in the prologue to his tale that he uses those techniques in order to turn a buck, because he uses his tale to make people feel guilty. Almost every one of the 7 deadly sins exists in the partner's tale. And he does that on purpose because he's trying to cover as many bases as possible and like sort of like pull on the guilt of each person that's there. Well, different people have different tendencies. So some people might tend to gamble, and other people might tend to be angry, and other people might tend to, you know, be, I'm trying to think of all the 7 deadly sins. There's a PowerPoint here. I know there's an image also in the PowerPoint from yesterday. I'm not going to do this PowerPoint, but there's a SpongeBob slide I want to show you, and it has all the sins on it. This is more of a history of the 7 deadly sins. Sometimes I do this PowerPoint, but there it is, the SpongeBob. Somebody sent this to me after we were talking about the 7 deadly sins, and it's going to come up again when we do Paradise Lost, the idea of the 7 deadly sins, but I don't know if this is true. I haven't watched a whole lot of SpongeBob. I know you're probably in shock about that, but SpongeBob came out when I was already grown. I don't have any children. I've watched it a few times with my niece and nephew, but so these are the 7 deadly sins, and what they're saying is that each one of these characters represents a different one of the sins. But you know, if you're going to try to make money out of making people feel guilty for their sins, you should try to touch on all the different sins in your tale. And so that's what the partner tries to do. Do you think this is true? Is this accurate with these characters? Gluttony and
Yes.
is it gluttony and sloth are not what you think they are in our modern sense. For the medieval people, sloth is about not being religiously diligent. And I know that's probably not the way they use it with Patrick. That character's name is Patrick, I know that. And so he's, you know, kind of lazy. And is that right? He's kind of lazy and messy and that dopey sort of character. But for the medieval people, sloth is about not being religiously diligent. You know, so if you're supposed to go to church, if you're supposed to do confession, if you're supposed to pray the rosary, whatever your obligations are, if you're delinquent in those, then that's the sin of sloth. Gluttony also is one that's sometimes misunderstood. Gluttony, sometimes people assume that it's only about food. And of course, you can be a glutton with food by overeating or taking too much than what you need. But gluttony, just as a definition, is about taking more of anything than what you need. So you could take too much of someone's attention or too much of someone's love, or, you know, you could, you know, it's sort of like, I don't know, when the pandemic was first breaking out, I was really mad because my mom went to Costco and she was talking to me about it later. I know this doesn't seem like it's related, but I'll bring it back around. And she was really mad because she wanted to get a couple packages of meat. And there was this guy that literally took his whole cart and took all the meat. And she's 81 years old. And she said to the guy, "Do you think I could have one package of meat?" You know, he's like, "Nope, it doesn't have any limits." And he like sailed off with his cart. And I was super mad. And that's an example of gluttony. Is he going to eat all that meat? No, but it's about taking more than your share and not leaving enough for other people of anything, you know. So where was I with that? Go back to the study guide. So the 7 deadly sins are, you know, part of his persuasion because he's trying to convince them to feel guilty, and then therefore out of guilt they pay. And then he benefits because he doesn't give all the money to the church like he's supposed to. I think I answered that one. Are there any others for the partner? All right, well, we can come back to it if you think of it. Under the Canterbury Tales in general, I think I've gone through all these things in discussion more than once, but if there's anything you want me to talk about there. Also terminology. On the midterm, there are, I think, 15 or 20 short answer questions that you have to do, something like that, 10. And they just give you a concept or a person, and you have to relate that to a piece of literature and then explain the significance to that piece of literature. So whenever there's a list of terminology, you'll see it here. You'll also see it in some of the material on Blackboard, if I go back to the content in this one here, where they start talking about the different pieces, you'll see them here as well. These are the concepts. There's about 50 or 60 of them on the midterm that will randomly show up. So when you take the midterm, you'll get an assortment, like a list, 12 or 15 of them, whatever 12 or 15 the system sends to you out of the list. So, but they're from these lists. I'll give you a study guide before the midterm. So are there any terms that you want me to go over there?
The fabulu, the body tail.
Fablo. Okay, so yeah, each one of the Canterbury Tales that Chaucer wrote, we know that he didn't finish the work because it would have been enormous. But Fableau and Body Tales are stories that have kind of like a lot of sexual innuendo. Some of the stories, we didn't read them, but there are some other stories in the Canterbury Tales that are dirty stories because Chaucer's trying to show a cross section of humanity. And you know that on any trip with 30 odd people, somebody's going to tell a dirty joke. And so the Miller's the one that does that. And he tells a story about a guy trying to get with the Miller, this guy's wife. And yeah, they tell us there's a couple of dirty stories, and that's the reference there. So sometimes when you say Canterbury Tales, people go, oh, the Canterbury Tales, eh? They're not all like that, obviously. The Partner's Tale isn't like that. The Wife of Bath's Tale isn't really like that. The cartoon had a little bit of bedroom stuff, but the tale itself doesn't have that. And so it's kind of known for that quality. Anything else?
Chaucer's retraction.
Right. I thought I had that in the PowerPoint, but it didn't end up making it in there. It is in the text. Let me see if I can put my finger on it real quick for you. At the end of this is Everyman. So while I'm finding it, I'll just tell you that at the end of the Canterbury Tales, years later, Chaucer wrote a retraction. There's got one. And what he did was, this is just a paragraph, and you can find it on page, I'm going to find the page for you because this is the same PDF that you have. In it, he retracted his work in a number of different works because the Canterbury Tales isn't the only thing that he wrote. And so he basically said, if any of this offends you, if you're upset at anything that I wrote here, then I apologize and I take it back. And not only that, but I take back these other works too, because they were, maybe blasphemous and people might not take them right. So I apologize and I regret writing them, kind of. Most people think that the reason that he did that was because that he was afraid of reprisals from the church, that people were going to say he was sacrilegious, because he's very critical of the partner. We can see the partner is painted in a very negative light. And so, at the end, I'm trying to find that page. He does have a retraction. Some people aren't happy that he has a retraction. They're kind of like, wish you'd just left that alone. And let your work stand. Okay, there's the Wife of Bath. It's gonna be a little bit after, I don't know if the partner's the last one that's in your textbook or not. But that's basically it. It's not even a page long. So some people say he was just trying to protect himself. Oh, the Nun's Priest's Tale. That's a fun one too. It's about chickens. Oh, I wish I could find it. Okay, nuns priest. Okay, here's the retraction. It's on page 358 of your PDF. Sorry, I didn't know the page number off the top of my head. So you can see that in it, he, basically says, if anybody's offended, I'm sorry, and I take it back, which is, you can't really take it back. You already wrote it. But, he says, I have these works and they have these sins in them, and for the salvation of my soul, don't take it as my work, as a representation of my work. So that's the retraction right there. It's in Middle English. I think for the midterm, you just need to know that he did do a retraction, that for whatever reason later in life or feeling threatened, maybe he wrote that retraction just so that he wouldn't be punished. There's an image down here that I put that's worth discussing. This is an image that's meant to portray sort of the metaphor in the partner's tale. You can see here the three youth are reaching for, the fruit of the tree, and at the root of it is death. And it goes back to that Latin phrase that the partner uses before he even begins his tale about greed being the root of all evil. And in this case, it's not just greed, but death comes to them as well because of their greed. So this is almost like an allegorical image. One of the questions asks you about that in the partner. So if you read the partner well enough, then you would be able to interpret that image, basically. All right, well, if there isn't anything from that and there aren't any questions about discussion number 2 and everybody knows what they need to prepare for Tuesday, then I think that that's it. Does anybody want to note anything in the chat that they would like to know about? I don't want to keep you longer than we need to be here. Some days we have to go the full length, some days we don't. So it's called balance. All right. Well, if something comes up, definitely communicate with me. Otherwise, I will be with you on Tuesday to start our discussion of the 16th century. All right. I hope you all have a good weekend. I'm looking forward to seeing your second discussion. So make them good. And I will see you on Tuesday. Bye.
Bye, Miss.
Have a good day.